You're gonna do today's big presentation for the Major 4 unaffiliated. Mr. Thompson loudly announced this to me, a new employee, in an ostentatious manner. The colleagues around us looked at Mr. Thompson with faces that said this was unbelievable. And for good reason. This presentation was a major deal with the company's future hanging in the balance. But Mr. Thompson seemed not to care about everyone's stares, wearing a smug look on his face. He probably wanted to make things hard for me. What's the matter? Can't do it. Mr. Thompson sneered at me. I'll do it. When I said that, he burst out laughing. If he wants to look down on me that much, I have my ways. Mr. Thompson's laughing days are numbered. My name is Matthew. I'm 23 years old. Since this spring, I've been working as a salesman at a major advertising company. It's nearly a miracle I've grown so much. After all, my life has been full of ups and downs. I lost my parents soon after I was born and grew up in children's home. The teachers at the children's home were kind to me, and I could live happily every day with kids in similar situations. But I always felt a part of me starving for affection. When I started going to kindergarten, all my friends had parents. Seeing friends holding hands with their mothers and fathers, I remember feeling a pain in my chest. It was then that everything changed. I was called by a teacher at the foster home and met one couple. Those people would later become my adoptive parents. My foster mother approached me, smiled kindly, and my adoptive father looked at me gently. From today, I'm your mom. Let's go home together. Saying that, they hugged me, and from that day, I started living with them. I didn't remember my biological parents. I was just confused by such sudden words and couldn't easily open up to my adoptive parents, but they patiently waited for me to open up. My adoptive mother always cooked my favorite dishes to make me happy, and my adoptive father took me to various places when he was off. Gradually, I started to open up to such adoptive parents. However, as I entered elementary school, I began to be teased. You're a discarded kid. Every time, I, being weak, cried and returned home more often. My adoptive parents every time told me, Matthew, you weren't discarded. Father and mother really care about you, Matthew. Be confident. Thanks to them, I was able to attend school every day without missing a day. Though not blood-related, my adoptive parents gave me a lot of love. Thanks to them, I can now live with my head held high. I can't thank them enough. When I was in my last year of high school, I started wanting to do the same job as my adoptive father. He worked at a major 4 unaffiliated corporation and was working every day as a salesman. My adoptive father looked shining to me. Someday, I wanted to be a top-notch salesman like my adoptive father. When I told my adoptive parents, they wholeheartedly supported my choice and recommended a good college. I studied hard and got into college. After graduating, I managed to join a major advertising company to become a salesman. Since it was far from where my adoptive parents lived, I started living on my own. On my first day as a salesman, I headed to my workplace, feeling nervous. At the nearest station, I saw many people who seemed to be new employees like me, which made me feel more determined. When I arrived at the workplace, there was a huge building. It was indeed a major advertising company. I'm going to work here starting today. I thought about all this as I stepped into the sales department's office. There, I saw their employees in the office working hard, and I watched them with shining eyes. Then, a man approached me. He was a young man, looking even younger than me in my new suit. Are you a new employee too? He was friendly and smiling. Yes. Nice to meet you. I'm Matthew. My words made the man smile even more. Great. I'm also starting work here today. I'm Mark. Nice to meet you. Despite his words, he looked as nervous as me. We both stood there, looking around. Then, another man approached us. He had a somewhat puzzled look on his face. Our expressions naturally became tense. Are you guys this year's new hires? Yes. Nice to meet you. Mark quickly responded, but the man clicked his tongue, looking obviously displeased. Why was this man so unhappy? I was really curious. Then, I quickly found out why. The man, scrutinizing us, said, I heard from HR. One is a high school grad and the other is an orphan, right? Mark and I were shocked by his words and looked at each other. I was reminded of my childhood when I was teased for not having parents. Why do I have to hear such things? Parents have nothing to do with work. Yes, that's right. I don't know my parents' faces. I'm a high school graduate. Hearing our words, the man burst out laughing. Why does this department always get such useless employee? What is HR thinking? I'm the sales department manager, Oscar. I don't want you guys to get in my way, so learn the job fast. Sales manager. Mark and I were lost for words. Can such a rude person really be the sales manager? As I started to get irritated, Manager Oscar introduced us to the other employee. He was going to teach us how to do sales from today. Nice to meet you. I'm Mr. Thompson. Brace yourselves, I'm going to be tough on you. Mr. Thompson must have heard about us from Manager Oscar. He looked down on us. In our sales department, we deal with a wide variety of companies. It might be tough for incompetent people like you. Mr. Thompson had already labeled us as incompetent. I was getting angrier by the minute. We were guided to our desks and told to sit and wait for a while. Next to me, Mark let out a deep sigh. Sure, I'm just a high school grad, but I applied because the job listing said high school graduates were welcome. That attitude's just not right. Exactly. It's crazy to label us incompetent before we've even started working. Mark and I quietly complained about them. Then, we saw Mr. Thompson approaching us. Then, he handed over some documents. This is a list of companies you'll be calling for sales. Go through it and find companies that might be interested in meeting. Matthew and Mark looked at each other again. The document listed well over 100 companies. Were we, as new employees, expected to call these companies and secure sales meetings? We were anxious, not knowing anything about sales tactics. Surely, they would teach us how to make calls and such. That was what I hoped, but that hope quickly faded. Within a week, secure meetings with at least 20 of these companies. If you can't, you don't belong in the sales department. Mr. Thompson said that and returned to his desk. It seemed he expected us to figure out the sales tactics on our own without any guidance. Seriously. The smile disappeared from Mark's face. Neither of us had ever made sales calls, but we had no choice but to try. Matthew encouraged Mark, let's just give it a shot, and started making calls immediately. However, no company wanted to listen to new employees like us, and we were rejected on the phone by each one. After hours of persistence, it was no use. Before we knew it, it was time to leave. Feeling utterly dejected at my own incompetence, I was disheartened. Mark was in the same boat. As Matthew was considering overtime, Manager Oscar loudly said, "Incompetents always want to work overtime, but this department prohibits it. Finish your work within the allotted time. If you can't, you have no choice but to quit." Manager Oscar sneered as he looked at us. Reluctantly, I began preparing to go home. I was returning home without any success for the day. On the way, Mark whined, "Maybe this job isn't for me." Hey, we just started, didn't we? It's just the beginning. Let's keep pushing. I encouraged Mark, but honestly, I felt the same way. Although it was great to become a salesman, inspired by my adoptive father, I was now feeling the difficulty of sales firsthand. Surrounded by unhelpful bosses, it felt like a weight on my chest. After getting home, I made a phone call. I didn't want to worry him, but I needed someone to talk to. "What's up?" Even though my adoptive father must have been busy, he picked up my call right away. Yes, I had called my adoptive father. "Sorry for calling out of the blue." "It's all right. Your call is always my top priority," my adoptive father said, laughing. That's just like him. He always prioritizes me. I talked to my adoptive father about what happened today and asked for his advice. "So that happened, huh? Sales departments often have people from athletic backgrounds. It's just the beginning of your job. Don't get discouraged so easily." My adoptive father said this and taught me how to sell. I took notes, determined to apply this knowledge from tomorrow. The most important thing is caring about the client and doing research. You're a hard worker, you can do it. Have confidence. He encouraged me with kind words throughout. How great it would have been if he were my boss. I expressed my gratitude to him and ended the call. Feeling a ray of hope in my exhausted heart, I fell asleep that night. The next day, I went to work with heavy steps. The senior employees were already at their desks, starting their work. Not to be outdone, I took my seat and resumed where I had left off yesterday. While I was doing so, Mark also arrived and started working right away. I made calls just as my adoptive father had taught me. And then, I managed to set up some presentations with a few companies. It seemed Mark had also managed to secure some appointments. We continued selling over our lunch break at our desks. As a result, we finished calling all the companies, more than 100, listed in the document. Mark and I were thrilled. Just when we were getting excited about possibly presenting next, Mr. Thompson approached us. Finally finished with that task, you too. Took you long enough. That's slow. I was shocked by Mr. Thompson's words. Those aren't words to say to a new employee. Then Mr. Thompson said something even more surprising. I'll handle the presentations and close the deals. You two call these new companies listed in this document and do sales. What? I blurted out without thinking. So Mr. Thompson would do the presentations that Mark and I had worked so hard to set up, and then claim the sales achievements for himself. I realized Mr. Thompson's intentions. That's just not fair. When I looked unconvinced, Mr. Thompson glared at me. What's the matter? Any problem? I got those phone appointments, so I want to do the presentations. Then, Mr. Thompson burst out laughing loudly. Not just him. Manager Oscar, who was watching nearby, laughed too. You think you can do it? Mr. Thompson is elite, unlike you, an orphan, graduated from Harvard University. So being an orphan means I can't do sales. I felt frustrated. Mark, watching this, seemed irritated too. Stop talking nonsense and just make sales calls. If you're envious, try getting into Harvard like me. It's not like I can just go to Harvard now. Saying such things, knowing that, is just mean. I was filled with a sense of despair. Then, Miss Ford, a female employee walking by, whispered to me, "Don't mind what they say. It's always like this when new employees come. They are just arrogant people wanting to feel superior." Miss Ford said this and gave me a candy wrapped in a cute package. Eat something sweet and refresh yourself. Miss Ford went back to her desk. I had thought Mark and I had no allies in the sales department, so her words really meant a lot to me. I put the candy she gave me in my mouth. It was very sweet and soothed my tired heart. After that, Mark and I continued to make sales calls within the limited time we had. I didn't neglect studying and researching, just as my adoptive father had advised. After work, when I got home, I made sure to check the information of the companies we had called. One day, as usual, I went to work and found the sales department abuzz. Then Manager Oscar approached me. "Mr. Thompson is out sick today with a fever. He was supposed to go to a company for a presentation. I want you to go in his place." I was surprised by Manager Oscar's words. He tried to remain calm, but there was a hint of unease. "Mr. Thompson has prepared the presentation materials, so even someone as incapable as you should be able to do it, right? You and Mark go together." I couldn't refuse my boss's order, so Mark and I reluctantly headed to the client's office. This unexpectedly became my presentation debut. Mark and I arrived at the client's office and were shown to the reception room. Then Mark looked at me worriedly. "Can we really do a presentation on such short notice?" I quietly agreed to Mark's words. After a while, the client's representative entered. We introduced ourselves and started a presentation using the projector. The representative asked several questions. Since I have researched beforehand, I could answer them easily, and the presentation ended smoothly. "That concludes our presentation." With my words, the representative gave a big round of applause. "Fantastic. Would your company consider signing a contract with us?" "Yes. We would be very grateful." I stood up, expressing our gratitude many times. Mark was also surprised but happy. Later that day, we presented at another company and made a contract there as well, making 2 deals in total. We immediately returned to our office and reported to Manager Oscar, who was visibly surprised. And for good reason. He hadn't expected us, who he thought were incapable, to successfully complete the presentations and secure contracts. The manager looked closely at the 2 contracts I handed him and cheered with joy. "You did it. I'm impressed." Mark and I looked at each other and smiled. We never thought we would hear such words from a boss who had looked down on us. It was a moment that made me realize continuous effort is rewarded. Then Manager Oscar said, "From tomorrow, if you got an appointment for a presentation, you go and do the presentation yourself. Learn how to make presentation materials from Ms. Ford. I'm counting on you." "Yes, we'll do our best." Finally, Manager Oscar acknowledged us. I was so glad I had kept up with studying about the companies. Miss Ford looked at us smilingly. For the first time, I felt truly fulfilled by my job. I vowed to work even harder from now on. Miss Ford kindly taught me how to make the presentation materials. Now that Manager Oscar acknowledged us, working here will be easier. I believed in all this, but then an incident occurred. The next day, when I arrived at work, Mr. Thompson was back, apparently feeling better. He seemed a bit grumpy, having heard about yesterday's presentations from Manager Oscar. He couldn't stand that we, whom he thought were beneath him, had secured contracts. It also seemed he didn't like that we were praised by the manager. Just because you managed to get 2 contracts, don't get cocky. Especially you, Mark. You didn't do anything, did you? Mr. Thompson was picking on Mark. "Yeah, right." Mark sighed heavily. "Just following Matthew around and counting it as your achievement. Lucky you. You're still incompetent, being just a high school grad." Mr. Thompson's attitude was worse than usual. His harsh behavior had other co-workers around us staring at him. Miss Ford also looked over with a puzzled expression. "We don't need incompetence. I'll talk to HR and get you transferred to another department." Mark began to shake with anger. This was bad. I desperately whispered to Mark, "Mark, calm down." But his anger didn't subside, and he suddenly approached Mr. Thompson. I tried to hold him back, but he shook off my hand. "What? Can handle the truth?" Mr. Thompson was laughing. Mark had finally snapped. "Is incompetent the only word you know? Even a high school grad can work hard and do the job." He confronted Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson glared at him. "The fact that you're incompetent is true, isn't it?" and yelled. Mark sighed heavily again and said, "With people like you around, this company will eventually fail." I quit and started gathering his things to leave. I desperately tried to stop him. "Mark, calm down. We promised to work hard together. I can't take this company anymore." "Matthew, you should quit too." With that, Mark left. The sales department went quiet all of a sudden. Now that one less incompetent is gone, things will be peaceful. Mr. Thompson seemed pleased. Could he really mean that? I was filled with disbelief. Mark had worked so hard, only to have his efforts dismissed and be forced to quit. I felt a fire of determination ignite within me. I would work hard for both myself and Mark. And so, I tirelessly carried on with my work. Still, Mr. Thompson's relentless comments continued. "You're still here. When are you going to quit?" Each time, it hurt, but I chose to ignore it. Soon after, my sales performance caught up with Mr. Thompson's, and I started receiving praise from the manager. My good sales results improved the entire department's performance, and even the upper management complimented us, making Manager Oscar's mood better every day. "Matthew, you're doing great. I'm relying on you." Words of praise from Manager Oscar, something I couldn't have imagined when I first joined. Miss Ford said, "It's all because of Matthew's hard work," and I felt fulfilled every day. However, Mr. Thompson watched all this with an unhappy expression. He probably never imagined I would become as capable in sales as him. When I was about to complete 6 months at the company, Mr. Thompson, who used to be my mentor, approached me in a good mood. Since I had become capable of getting contracts for presentations, he was no longer my mentor. Mr. Thompson had become someone who only interacted with me to make snide remarks. I wondered what he wanted with me this time. Maybe more sarcasm. I braced myself. However, to my surprise, Mr. Thompson was in a very good mood. "You've been doing well lately." All I could respond was, "Thanks to you, I've been able to get some contracts." Mr. Thompson sneered at me. "You, who didn't even graduate from a prestigious university, are getting praised by the manager more than me, an elite. You can't even speak the second language, can you?" French? Well, yes, a bit. Mr. Thompson seemed annoyed that the manager was praising me. Then, he handed me some documents and said something astonishing. You're going to do today's presentation for the major foreign affiliated corporation. But isn't that your job, Mr. Thompson? As I was shocked, Mr. Thompson cut me off. The manager recognizes you, so this should be a piece of cake for you, right? Do it instead of me. What was Mr. Thompson thinking? I looked through the documents he handed me and was surprised. It was for a well-known major foreign affiliated corporation. Could my presentation really appeal to such a big company? Co-workers around us looked shocked. This major corporation is critical for our company's future. Do it well. I'll accompany you, so don't worry. Mr. Thompson spoke in a condescending tone. As I remained silent, he mocked me. What's the matter? Can't do it. Even after being praised by the manager, are you still incompetent? All right, if that's how it is, I'll do it. I decided to take on the presentation. I'll do it. Mr. Thompson looked surprised at my words. He probably thought I wouldn't accept. With limited time before the presentation at the major foreign affiliated corporation, I quickly reviewed the materials. Mr. Thompson watched me intently. As the presentation time approached, Mr. Thompson and I left the office for the major foreign affiliated corporation. He walked in silence on the way. My mind was filled with thoughts of making the presentation successful. Arriving at the major foreign corporation, I was amazed by the number of workers from other countries. Typical for a foreign-owned company. Seeing my reaction, Mr. Thompson laughed. Don't worry so much. I'll help you out. Okay. Mr. Thompson had an attitude as if it was natural for me to fail. Mr. Thompson and I were then led to a large meeting room where the representative waited. The representative is from France. This meant I had to present in French. I felt so nervous. Mr. Thompson greeted the representative fluently in French. I tried to greet as well, but Mr. Thompson belittled me again. Just greet in English. Don't overdo it. I was irritated on the inside. I prepared the projector to start the presentation. Then, Mr. Thompson, standing beside me, quietly spoke to me. Can you do it? The presentation is in French. Don't worry. I said that and took a deep breath, then began presenting in French. What? The moment I started presenting in French, Mr. Thompson looked astonished. He probably never thought I could speak French so fluently. You can speak French. Despite being in the middle of the presentation, Mr. Thompson raised his voice. I ignored him and continued with the presentation. The representative listened to my presentation, nodding along. As my presentation was nearing its end, one American man entered the conference room and started listening. When I finished and bowed, the foreign representative stood up and clapped loudly for me. Mr. Thompson seemed speechless. The American man who came in midway approached me. Great job. Thanks for the clear presentation. I've heard about you from your father. Of course, we'd like to sign a contract, right? The man sought agreement from the representative. Of course. The representative responded with a smile. As the vice president said, your presentation, Matthew, it was perfect, and looked at me. Yes, the American man was the vice president of the company. Of course. Thank you very much. I replied, and the vice president smiled. The vice president, Mr. Thompson, looked like he was about to collapse in shock. Ignoring him, the vice president continued. Your father, the president, would have loved to hear your presentation, but it was too short notice when we decided you'd come. I'll report your outstanding performance to him. I'm a bit embarrassed to show it to my father, I said, and the vice president replied, no need to be. Your father always talks about you at the office. He always feels proud of you, and smiled. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson looked incredulous. Matthew's father is the president. The president of this company is supposed to be a foreigner, right? Mr. Thompson's thoughts were leaking out loud. The vice president looked puzzled at Mr. Thompson. You're quite rude. Matthew is the son of our president. They may not be blood related, but they have a wonderful parent-child relationship. And Matthew graduated from the prestigious Cambridge University. Mr. Thompson was dumbstruck. Matthew graduated from Cambridge. He collapsed to his knees. I was actually adopted overseas as a child and raised in England by my adoptive parents. They taught me a lot of things patiently and loved me as their own, raising me to who I am today. My adoptive father started a major foreign affiliated corporation and is the president. He established this branch in the U.S. 10 years ago. Even as president, he's still actively involved in sales and takes on tasks like any other employee. I was inspired by him and dreamt of becoming a salesman. When I asked him how to achieve my dream, he recommended Cambridge University. I studied hard and got into Cambridge. Just before graduating, I made a decision. Dad, I want to work in your company. I revealed this to my adoptive father, and he was happy. But he said something unexpected. I understand your thoughts, but first, I want you to gain experience in a different company. Then join my company. I'll keep a position open for you. He said that to me. He wanted me, still young, to see the world first. I understood my adoptive father's intention. So, I returned to my home country, US, and began working as a salesman. Actually, for me, in my university, speaking French was easier since I had a lot of friends who spoke French fluently. That's why Mr. Thompson's plan to embarrass me for not being able to speak French backfired. As Mr. Thompson sat dumbfounded, I said to him, "The presentation is over, and we've successfully got the contract, so let's head back." Just then, a familiar face appeared before Mr. Thompson and me. "Matthew, long time no see. I heard you were here and rushed over." "Mark, it's been a while. You look well, and that's great to see." Mr. Thompson was even more stunned at Mark's appearance. "What? Why are you here? Huh? Didn't you know?" Actually, I had introduced Mark to my adoptive father. My adoptive father had been wanting talented individuals for the U.S. branch. Trusting my recommendation, he hired Mark on the spot. True to my word, Mark had become an immediate asset to my adoptive father's company. Knowing this fact made Mr. Thompson's face turn even paler. To add insult to injury, Mark looked at Mr. Thompson and sneered, surprised that Matthew, whom you thought less of, holds a higher position than you, Mr. Thompson. No, that's not it. Mr. Thompson was clearly flustered. If you had been sincere from the start, you wouldn't have to be so panicked now. Too bad. I have a sales meeting to attend to, so I'll be leaving now. With that, Mark left. Mr. Thompson seemed utterly defeated and couldn't move from the spot. I left him there and returned to the office. Everyone at the office welcomed me with applause, knowing I had successfully got the contract with a major foreign affiliated corporation. Even manager Oscar, who had been so harsh before, praised me. "Sorry for my attitude before. I was surprised to find out you're the son of the president of that major foreign affiliated corporation. Let's have a celebration for Matthew's successful deal tonight." That night, everyone from the sales department gathered at a bar and celebrated. I invited Mark and introduced him to everyone. Manager Oscar, surprised but enlightened, said, "I've learned not to judge people by their academic background. Thank you for teaching me that valuable lesson." And thanked Mark. Mark, with tears in his eyes, reconciled with Manager Oscar. "Thanks to Matthew, our department can change," said Ms. Ford with a smile. However, Mr. Thompson never showed up. Half a year later, Mr. Thompson left the company. His pride was probably hurt knowing that I, whom he looked down on, was actually higher in position than Mark. After he left, no one knew what happened to Mr. Thompson or where he was. But this incident made me hope that people would stop judging others by their educational background or upbringing and start looking at their true character. As for me, "Matthew, let's go." Yes, Ms. Ford and I started dating officially. I had been secretly in love with her since we first met. When I honestly shared my feelings, I found out she felt the same way, and we became a couple. For a while longer, I went to work hard at my current company, aiming to become an even better salesman. Eventually, I plan to join my adoptive father's company. I'm looking forward to continuing to enjoy my fulfilling work and personal life.